Hey leaders and managers, Marcel here. If you haven't heard, my leadership development course is now in full swing and it's getting great reviews. It's called From Boss to Leader. And if you like the theme of the podcast, hey, you're going to love this course. It's intended for emerging leaders and managers that want to learn real leadership competencies, the everyday stuff that you need in order to engage and inspire and motivate your team for a high performance. I'd love to personally speak with you and get to know your current situation to see if you're a good fit for the course. To learn more about the From Boss to Leader course, visit my website, marcelschwantes.com, and click on Virtual Training.
The future of work isn't about shareholder value, technology, metrics, or automation. It's about being human and putting people first through actionable love. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast, where we hold deep conversations with extraordinary people to help you grow as a leader and expand your business. Here's your host, Marcel Schwantes.
Welcome to another episode of the Love in Action podcast. Glad you are here. Please share this episode with someone in a leadership or management role. And hey, if you like today's show, do us a favor and drop us a positive review and maybe even a 5-star rating on iTunes. We would be grateful for that. So if you're a longtime listener, you know that I often feature executives and the CEOs of major corporations that believe, as I do, that a great company culture where people are taken care of and develop and excel as human beings is a true competitive advantage. Culture, as the saying goes, is king. And one of those companies that I've been writing about now for years, I reference them in my Inc. articles, in my online course, and in my speaking engagements, is the WD-40 company. Go into your garage right now or look under your kitchen sink. Chances are you're going to find a can of WD-40 in there. It's an iconic brand that we cannot live without. And that's just one in a line of maintenance products and home care and cleaning products that the company offers. So the chief architect and CEO of the WD-40 company for the last 25 years has been Gary Ridge. And, someone that I deeply respect and admire. I've had a conversation with Gary in the past. Gary is truly a pioneer of the servant leadership philosophy and really the catalyst for shaping the WD-40 tribe, as they call their employees. And so this global company tribe has been ranked as one of the top workplaces. They've won numerous awards. And, in the age of the Great Resignation and quiet quitting, WD-40 continues to have one of the highest employee retention and employee engagement, numbers in the world. So Gary is also a global thought leader. He's written books and he speaks and he's often quoted all over the place. He's the subject of case studies and really has been the face of the company. So since I follow Gary Ridge, I got wind that Gary announced his retirement back in March of this year. And obviously, those are some very big shoes to fill. So when they announced Gary's successor, I'm thinking, hey, anyone that takes the helm of a company like WD-40 from a pioneer like Gary Ridge has got to have some kind of leadership skills. And they have to be an incredible leader themselves. So, because, this person I'm thinking is going to have to continue to grow this global WD-40 brand worldwide during a period dominated by inflation. And we're still dealing with the disruptions caused by the pandemic. And on top of that, of course, they're going to have to sustain this incredible culture that we know and love. So on September 1st of this year, just a couple of months ago from this recording, Steve Brass, who served as the company's president and chief operating officer since 2019, took over for Gary Ridge. And I knew right then, we need to get him on the show. really to not only learn more about him, but also explore his leadership ideas. But I want to get into the inside edge on how Steve is going to continue to leverage this WD-40 culture that is globally known. And I also want to learn some lessons from Steve that we can pass on to you about leadership, succession planning, and really building a culture that people are proud of, that people can't wait to come to work, Steve Brass has been with the company since 1991, and as I mentioned, most recently as president and COO. He was responsible for the day-to-day operations of all three of the company's operating segments, as well as its global brand and digital strategies. The new president and now CEO of the WD-40 company now joins us. Steve Brass, welcome to the Love in Action podcast.
Thank you, Marcel. It's great to be with you today. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Steve. And I so appreciate you coming on the show just to share with everything that, that has transpired up to this point. And, we were talking a little bit offline, you and I were, and I asked you if you had done any interviews, and I did my Google search. I didn't find anyone interviewing you or you being on any podcast. So this might be actually your first one since being assigned in the role of CEO. So I am just geeked up about this. All right, Steve. So we have a kickoff question for listeners to get to know a little bit about you. You ready?
I'm ready.
What's your story?
So my story is I'm an Englishman, a Yorkshireman from the north of England. I was brought up in a small village in Yorkshire, population 1,000. The humans were outnumbered by the sheep, right? Early on in my life, I kind of discovered a passion for learning, and I had, like a lot of people, I had an inspirational teacher that recognized my talent for languages, Mrs. Hall. And I just really loved learning and getting into languages. So I learned French and German and went on to university and studied those languages. Went on to live in both France and Germany and got that wonderful cultural experience, set up businesses for WD-40 in those places. And so that was, my first job was kind of international sales and using my languages. And I was kind of an introverted guy when I was younger, and some of that still stays with me today. And I developed these kind of alter egos. I could become, in French, I'd become Etienne, the Latin lover. And in German, I was Stefan, the guy who got stuff done. So that was kind of some of my formative experiences. And here we are, 35 years on. I'm just so humbled. 7 weeks into my new role as CEO of this truly wonderful company. So yeah, it's been a great journey to get here.
And it's truly a global company because it is an American brand, is it not? The WD-40 company.
It is. It was invented back in 1953 in San Diego, California.
Yeah,
correct?
Yeah. And Gary, being the consummate Australian, still has not lost his accent. Has been the CEO, and now you are an Englishman that takes over for the Aussies. So it's quite a global conglomerate.
Yeah, and there's a little history between those two there as well. Huh? But,
maybe we can get into a little bit of history, but I wanted to, I feel like, and I gave my tribute to Gary at sort of in the introduction, but I want to continue to talk a little bit about the impact that Gary had on the company and maybe you as a person as well. So share a little bit about, what did you learn from Gary all these years, and maybe how did Gary help you become the leader that you are today?
Ooh, that is how long you got, right? So
yeah.
Gary Ridge has been a mentor to me since I was 25 years old. So the culture of WD-40 company wasn't always the culture we have today, and Gary has crafted that over 2.5 decades. So I met Gary when I was a 25-year-old young man. And he put his arm around me and told me that he'd been asked by the then CEO, Jerry Schleif, to watch out for me and take care of me. And ever since then, I really feel that Gary's had his arm around me and lots of other people in the company as well, and has taken care of me. And he's just this guy who always walked the talk, right? So a lot of leaders, they talk about values, they put the values up on the wall, but they don't really demonstrate them. Gary was just this wonderful example of how to walk the talk and demonstrate and embody and bring to life the values of the organization. So yeah, he his work ethic, his fun, right? Some of the ridgisms that he developed. I so many things he taught me over the years. I mean, I don't know where you want to take it, but many different directions. Just a wonderful role model for a young leader to have.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, Steve, that Gary was really a celebrity in the business world. That's kind of how I saw him through my lenses, because a lot of the research I've done, so many places I bumped into Gary on in the literature, people talking about the culture and his leadership style. He co-wrote a book with Ken Blanchard. So some people may have the same expectations of you to be out there in the spotlight, but you're your own guy. So how are you going to deal with this and being sort of cast under the shadow of Gary and his legacy?
So I think when you inherit a situation, right, as a new CEO, you have to kind of analyze the situation. It's very, very clear to me that my role is about sustaining success going forward, right? There's nothing that needs to be fixed. It's really about just taking this wonderful business, this wonderful culture, and building on this huge legacy. So I think, I bring, what do I bring to it? I'm a different individual to Gary. Gary's this hugely charismatic individual, and you have to play to your own strengths. So with me, I think it's just a waste of time to try and even, fill Gary's shoes, right? It's impossible to do. You're going to lose. So I'm much more about a team and a distributed leadership team and building a strong team around me who can make me look better than I am. That's the goal.
Yeah. One of my favorite Gary moments is in listening to all his interviews and podcasts. And I bumped into this one. He, you're right. He is a very charismatic dude, but at the same time, he's one of the most humble leaders that I know. And he said that the three most powerful words a leader will ever say are, "I don't know." And have you heard him talk about that? I don't know. And that's such
every week. Every week. Every week. So one of the big things Gary and I do have in common is learning. We're obsessed with learning. Gary would always, a man rose at 3 a.m. every day, right? So he'd have the early hours. And I tried to do the same. I tried to dedicate an hour to learning every single day. And the morning is the best time. And I think from my own experience and linking back to Gary, I see learning as a source of humility because, to take the old kind of Albert Einstein kind of adage, right? The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that was true of Gary. Gary made a journey, right? So I remember meeting the young Gary Ridge. He was very results focused, much less people focused than he became in his later years. So Gary made a journey as well, just like many of us do.
I bet. All right. I want to ask you what was your favorite Gary Ridge moment?
Well, let's go back to the fun moment. So, there's been many in terms of education, but a fun moment with Gary was when I was a young guy and I was rising up the ranks. I was with Gary and another Australian colleague in a German restaurant, and he said, "We want you to become an honorary Australian." And I'm like, "What do you mean you want me to become an Australian?" It's like, "Well, you British guys, you sent all those Aussies, to prison in Australia, and what you have to do, you have to go to the other table over there in the restaurant and steal some bread. And you have to go on your hands and knees and then climb up and steal some bread." So I had to go through this embarrassing ritual of going over to the table next to us, these 8 or 9 Germans looking shocked at me, reaching up, stealing their bread and going back to my table. So I think that just talks to his sense of fun. He had a great sense of fun.
That's awesome. Okay, I want to transition to more serious matters in respect to this whole succession planning strategy that for you it's probably been in the works now for I don't know years maybe, but so I want to be able to use this as a way to educate other leaders, especially those up in the C-suite, right? Because I think that not enough attention, I believe, is paid to the process of succession planning. But it also, Steve, has to be done the right way, because sometimes in transitions, if it's not properly executed, then the culture suffers, right? So speak to high-level leaders, maybe of growing companies, about the importance of succession planning. So that's the why of it. And then how do we do it? How do we craft an effective succession plan?
Sure. So I think it starts, I mean, I actually prefer the term talent management to succession planning. And I think that's where it starts. If you kind of have an approach to the business that, look, you want to develop all of the talent about the organization. You want to give all the, tribe mates, as we call ourselves, give all your employees opportunities to learn and grow. It kind of starts there. And then, as opportunities, the business grows and opportunities appear, you'll identify the talent, and that's linked to ambition and what people's ambitions are too. And you have an ongoing dialogue with individuals, and we have a great process for that at WD-40 company. So it starts with talent management, but for the top job, I mean, I can relate to my own experience, and from my experience of moving through to CEO, the top job, it could not have been done better. It was started 8 years ago. So very deliberate process. I had one of those conversations with Gary. It was, Steve, what if? Whenever Gary started a conversation with what if, you knew something was coming, right?
Yeah.
What if you were to move to the US? And what if you were to be successful? And would you be interested in potentially taking over from me one day if you were successful? So, and then from there, a very deliberate process by Gary, which is very hard, I imagine. So I think of when the time comes for me, and I'm 8-9 years away from retirement, so I'm already thinking about it. Starting early. I think they had multiple candidates. It wasn't just me. We had multiple candidates for succession to CEO. But then when you identify kind of the one, giving them, and Gary just gave away parts of his job over multiple years, and then was just so generous in his teaching with me over the past 5 or 6 years in particular. Incredible.
Yeah. That's great, because to me, that speaks to the servant leadership philosophy again,
exactly.
That Gary was able to expose you to different areas and stretch your development even, years before to kind of get you prepared. I don't know, Steve, it sounds to me like he already knew it was going to happen. Years ago, he already knew, no, it's going to be Steve.
Well, I actually thought, 25 years ago when he put his arm around me, he always invested in, certainly in the European business, not just me, and because of that growth, I had opportunities to grow as an individual. And I was just always given opportunities to grow. And that's why I stayed with the company. It's having opportunities to learn and grow. And whether it was setting up our business, moving to Germany and living there for 5 years, after 6 months with the company, I was given the opportunity to launch our French direct business as a 25-year-old. Incredible experience.
Yeah. I recall back in my younger career development days, I worked for a staffing company back in the 90s. And I do recall the co-founder. He was I think he was the president at the time. He would go around to every branch. He would basically travel and visit every branch to talk with the high performers, the top producing people that were, account managers and senior level recruiters, and all he was doing basically is he was formulating, okay, who's going to be the people that I want to move into those executive roles. And they had identified which people they wanted to talk to at every branch, right? They were the top producers. And I happened to be one of them at the time. And I remember him sitting down and talking to me about what are your interests about running your own branch and running your own company, being an entrepreneur and all that. And at that time, I didn't have an interest in actually running my own branch. I just wanted to just run my desk and produce, right? And so later I understood the method to his madness, if you will, is that he was looking at his succession plan, because five years after that he moved to a different role, and sure enough, somebody that was groomed from an account manager role went up, became a branch manager, then a district manager, et cetera, and moved into that role. And so, yeah, that speaks to succession planning. It is a strategy that has to start early in the game, and you have to identify those high potentials really early on to see if they may even have an interest. Put your arm around that person and probe and explore whether they are indeed that they have an interest in becoming and groomed into a leader.
Yeah, and I think another part of it that Gary introduced. So his kind of philosophy of help me get an A, don't mark my paper, right? I mean, that's a critical thing. And so the appraisal process that Gary introduced for the company is just wonderful. Every 3 months, you sit down with your coach, you write your own appraisal. You only write one appraisal, right? And it's your own.
Yeah.
And you have a dialogue, right, about performance, how you can help that person achieve an A. And then once a year, we have a formal process for succession planning. But also once a year, at least, we sit down. It's like, with each individual, how do I help you grow? What are your ambitions? Are you geographically mobile? All of those things. So we're having that regular dialogue informally, but as part of a process. And that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. So you just touched on a few things about the culture, and we can't have a conversation about the WD-40 company if we don't mention the culture. Mm-hmm. So let's transition there. I have an understanding of what Gary would say about the culture, but I want to hear it in your own words now, Steve. Okay, what makes the WD-40 company culture so special and a competitive advantage?
Sure. So I think there's multiple aspects to that. The first thing is, we have clearly articulated and lived values, and the critical piece is in living them and leaders demonstrating them. So part of that appraisal process is every quarter, every employee, every tribe mate in the world writes down how they're demonstrating the value, how they have demonstrated the values in the past quarter. And that's a conversation they have with their coach. Servant leadership mindset is critical. Suppressing your ego, putting people first, putting others first. I'm a big believer, and I know Gary was, of the inverted organization where the CEO is at the bottom of the pyramid, and then all of our stakeholders we serve come above us. So the CEO is at the bottom of the organizational structure, and we're there to serve all the stakeholders. So I think that servant leadership mentality is a big part of it. We are a global business. We're the United Nations, if you like. We have business in 176 countries. We have people in 18 countries now, I believe, around the world. So this huge cultural melting pot.
Yeah.
We have one of the true global brands as well, consistently executed around the world. One of the best, most widely distributed brands as well. A journalist once commented that you're never more than 8 foot away from a rat or a can of WD-40, and I think there's some truth to that. Huh?
Yeah.
We have a very high engagement, 93% last score. So our people, they love the company, they stay with the company. We create an environment for them to learn and grow. We have a long-term focus, which is quite rare, I think. Gary was a big fan of Simon Sinek and his infinite game. And,
right.
This clear purpose we have of creating positive, lasting memories. And then this focus on long-term development of people who tend to stay with us. Our average tenure is 8 years for employees. But we have many, many leaders who stay. I mean, I'm 31 years. We have many, many leaders who've stayed decades with the company. So that's special in terms of consistency over time, right?
Yeah.
So leaders staying a long time, and then learning. And in particular, I think Gary's culture of learning moments, right, is one of the greatest things is in terms of his legacy. This psychological safety created by the culture of the learning moment. We don't make mistakes at WD-40. We have learning moments, and it kind of sets you free. It's like, okay, coach, I had a learning moment again, right? And we talk about, what happened and then how we can do better next time. And it's a learning process. It's not a blame game. It's a learning process. And
I'm so glad you mentioned the learning culture. The evidence asserts that one of the top reasons why employees come to your company is because they're seeking career growth, career development, right? They want to grow as not only employees, but also as human beings, right? And it's one of those innate desires that I think every human being has. It's to have that sort of growth mindset. And I think that's one of the reasons why people stay with your company as long as 8 years. That is astounding to me, Steve. And that's because they keep growing and developing, right? And so you always afford them that opportunity to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Going back to the point you made earlier about, Gary's kind of phrase of, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of fundamental to this as well, and just kind of shows humility. And when I moved to the US 6 years ago, I heard a phrase I hadn't really heard in Europe very much. And the phrase was, all of us are smarter than any one of us. And I really deeply believe that's true. And I think that really underpins servant leadership. It's just suppressing your ego, asking other folk for their opinions, and having the discipline to seek out others' opinion, because you may learn something, right? And you may come up with a better solution than you had, right? So, take it back to Simon Sinek's kind of leaders speak last, right? But you have to force yourself as a leader to seek others' opinions and keep your own opinions to yourself and speak last. Yeah.
Perfect. Steve, I want to have you, again, speak to leaders, and this time not just, people up in the C-suite, but maybe a middle manager, in the trenches. And they're trying to balance this whole thing. How do I engage my employees while at the same meeting my numbers, et cetera? Can you give them a lesson on kind of building a positive people first culture like WD-40? I mean, is there a first step?
So I think the learning piece is a huge part of it. And kind of the mantra that I'm kind of bringing to the business as we kind of build on Gary's legacy is about, learning faster to grow faster. And I know I can't talk about other companies. I'm kind of, institutionalized. I've been here 31 years, so I can talk about our experience. And I know young people coming into our organization. So we've created different squads around the world, kind of loose squads outside of people's functional roles. For example, on things like digital transformation and e-commerce, and the most recent one is an omni-channel squad. And you can see in these, particularly the younger individuals, who they love being part of something bigger than themselves, right? And Gary used to talk about that all the time, right? So he used to say, you're born into a family, you join a team for weekly sport, but a tribe is a place you belong. And I think, finding somewhere you belong, if you're a learner, and they're the kind of people we want to join WD-40 Company, people who can learn and grow, then, that kind of belonging and feeling part of something bigger than yourself with a really clear purpose, which for WD-40 is creating positive, lasting memories in everything we do. And that's a recipe for people staying in your company.
That's great. Steve, I want to transition to talking about leadership in the pandemic, all those lessons that so many of us learned literally overnight, and maybe tie into Great Resignation. That was sort of a cause of the pandemic. So, flashback to March 2020, and what would you say for you were the biggest lessons you've learned, Dan, as a leader, looking back?
I would say it was possibly one of the periods of the biggest learning in my entire life. Everything changed. You had to motivate the troops. You had to, first of all, kind of make sure we were safe, right? Just from a cash flow point of view. And so we worked all the scenarios on the, what ifs, and, how to guarantee kind of the cash flows to keep the business going. And we're grateful that we have a very, very solid business and a very, very strong brand that tends to perform very well in kind of recessionary periods. But then there was I think the thing that surprised us the most. So learning the digital ways of working, the Zoom, the Teams, we really adopted that. And so from kind of a change to lifestyle, from somebody like myself traveling 70% of the time beforehand to much, much less. And now, you know what? I'm never going back there, right? You have to get out and see your people. You have to travel, but there's a limit. And I think the days of traveling 70% are just gone now, right? Because we have these digital tools. But I think we were all just positively amazed by our capacity as kind of tribe mates and human beings to adapt, right? And just find ways, whatever was thrown at us, just to pivot. And I think looking back at the pandemic, I think it's going to be one of the biggest periods of learning we've ever had. And the agility we've learned by pivoting on a kind of daily basis just to meet the challenges of the pandemic has just been incredible. And we're a better business because of it, no question.
Yeah. So then as a result of the pandemic, all of a sudden now we were thrust into this kind of a new, well, some people say it's not new. I'm talking about the Great Resignation. It's just kind of a relabel of something that we've dealt with, maybe not you guys, but that is the lack of engagement or disengagement in the workplace. But it became we saw it through some new eyes where people realized that they didn't have to work in toxic work cultures. They, chose to go where they felt like they had purpose and meaning in the work that they did. So talk about the challenges that maybe you faced as a company during that great resignation. We're still seeing it now. And how did you guys address it?
Well, so this is going to sound very arrogant, but we haven't really suffered from it. So our retention rates haven't moved.
Right.
We have employee turnover between 4% and 8%. It's been that forever, depending on the market. So we haven't seen any big change. And I think, if anything, we're a net benefiter because people are looking for great cultures, are looking for great places to work. They're looking at places where they can join and learn and grow and develop themselves. And we offer that. And actually, our market, I look at the United States, our market has increased because we've got our own kind of limitations of you have to be based in San Diego. It's like, no, you don't. We've got all these remote tools now. We're picking up talent from, Chicago or Midwest, wherever. So I think, for the likes of us, it's really strengthened us as a business. Right?
Yeah, this is very key, Steve, for me, because we're talking about Gallup tracking employee engagement data for 3-4 decades. The story really hasn't changed, is what you're telling us. In companies that have great cultures, it's just that they just kind of repackaged this with a new headline called The Great Resignation. But if there was no great resignation, I would ask you the same thing about, how do we flip the thing around from a disengaged workforce to an engaged workforce. You would tell me the exact same thing, right? Regardless of great resignations or quiet quittings, it still comes down to, are you taking care of the people, growing them, developing them, and giving them a great place to work? To me, that speaks to common sense, but it's not common practice.
No, and it starts with servant leadership. It starts with leaders, mastering their own egos. And we've all got to go through that journey. Yeah. You've got to suppress your own ego and put other people first. And that is leaders that don't do that and who are still imposing hierarchical, out-of-date, old-fashioned leadership styles, and they're the businesses that are struggling today.
Yeah. All right, I want to transition to some fun stuff, Steve. So let's have a little bit of fun here at your expense. In researching for the show, I stumbled into a website that talked about WD-40 having its own fan club, and they listed more than 2,000 purposes for the product, including, in one case, removing pythons from a bus in Thailand. So tell us, what are some of the best and maybe least known WD-40 tricks and hacks that it's going to help us in our garages, in our kitchens, in our workshops?
Sure. So we get lots of, it used to be letters, right? But these days it's on social media, people posting. And that's one of the, it's just a pleasure to, this kind of storytelling that happens online is just a great vehicle now to listen to. So there's a couple of uses that we don't recommend, right? We get people writing in, they use it for arthritis, right? They use it for their joints to make their joints recover. That is not a recommended use by WD-40.
Yeah, I think my orthopedic would not appreciate that.
Exactly. But people tell us they use it, which is kind of weird. Some of the cool ones, you can remove crayon marks. So if your kids are crayoning and it gets on your paint, WD-40 is great at removing crayon marks.
Wow.
From walls.
Okay.
Is one thing. Removing car bugs. So you get bugs, you get flies or bugs on your car, on your on your headlights or on your car. WD-40 to remove bugs from the car as well. So there's a couple of cool ones.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, I have a 9-year-old, so I'm going to take you up on the crayons. So, Steve, as we wind down here, I pose you the leadership love question. It's tradition on the show. So of all the servant leadership ideas and things that we discussed or maybe didn't cover yet, in your own words, how do we lead with love day in and day out?
So I think for me, my personal journey, it's been about kind of involvement and mastering my ego. And this point about, all of us really are smarter than any one of us. I think there's a risk when you get the big title and the big package that, you automatically assume you're the smartest person in the room. And in my case, at least, that has very rarely been true. So take the time to seek others' opinions, to involve others. So one of the first things I did as CEO, I went out on a global listening tour and I asked people, put me a video together, give me your 3 wishes. If you were in my role, what would you do? and then give me one barrier that you'd like me to remove. And just the power of that. I mean, I got hours worth of videos from the tribe around the world. And that is just so incredible, right? And, I'm reminded of an old African proverb, which I absolutely love, which is that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's a pretty, my leadership journey, I think that's a summary from being a young, kind of arrogant, ambitious, results-focused leader to just realizing it's all about the people and just stop yourself and ask for others' involvement, others' opinions, and you will make better decisions if you do.
Love it. Steve, we bring it home with 2 questions, as we do with every guest. Personally, what's really tugging at your heart right now that you'd like us to know?
So I think it's the point about hierarchical leadership, and it's time to consign it to the history books. And this is a movement, Marcel. You're part of it. We work with another organization called the Institute for Real Growth. I brought them into the business with a program for humanized growth that we're running internally. So I think this hierarchical leadership, this ego-driven leadership is out of date. There's a movement going on. There's many people who are leading that movement, such as yourself, and many leaders like myself who absolutely buy into it. So I'm glad to be part of that movement. It's a force for good. It's a force for people. And, the world needs more of that. Love-based leadership. I love that.
Yeah, same here. That's why we do what we do. We got to keep banging on that drum, Steve. Finally, you close us out your way, as all guests do, with that one key takeaway from this discussion, something to inspire us all.
I think, it would be back to Gary's leadership. And, I'm so grateful to him. And that one thing that he really gave the company is a culture of the learning moment. And if listeners take away one thing from this podcast, it's the importance of psychological safety, of being able to, have learning moments versus making mistakes. It's a really subtle but very, very important point at WD-40, and it absolutely underpins our culture, our continual improvement, and the way we learn as a business. So that would be the one thing I think I'd leave you with.
Perfect. Yeah, it's no coincidence we started with Gary and we ended with Gary. So another way to pay tribute to the man. So if people want to connect with you, Steve, where can they go?
They can find me on LinkedIn. So Steve Brass, CEO, WD-40 Company, they can find me on LinkedIn. So that's the best place to find me.
I had a blast hanging out with you today. Thanks for spending the time and inspiring us, and best of luck in your new role leading the company forward.
Thank you, Marcel. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Keep the conversation going on social media and comment on this episode with hashtag Love in Action Podcast. And as always, look for the show notes for this episode on my website, marcelschwantes.com. And finally, hey, we're always looking for sponsors to help spread the Love in Action movement globally. If you have an interest, reach me on my website or find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your business grow.